All right, well, it's now my great pleasure to introduce Mark Rozell, who's Dean of the Schar School of Public Policy, and that's at George Mason University, that is fortunate enough to have their professional campus here in Arlington, Virginia. The main campus we all know is in Fairfax, but the real brains of the operation are here in Arlington, Virginia. And he's a good friend of Richard Barton. In fact, he actually hired Richard Barton to do some work for the Schar School, and he was kind enough to advise us on past elections, and we couldn't resist the temptation to ask him back again to tell us about 2012, which I must admit is the most puzzling thing I've ever seen in U.S. political history. So without further ado, I give you Mark Rozell.
Great, thank you, Robert. And I'm going to talk, I think, more about the midterm congressional elections prospects. I hope that's okay, because I think it's time to have a prospective analysis of where the political parties stand and what's likely to happen. There's going to be a Virginia component in all of this, given that we have the state elections this year. And there is an issue that harkens back to a very famous Virginia campaign back in 1989 that may show up in this election cycle in Virginia, but also in the national midterm elections. That could overturn possibly historical patterns that right now suggest things are looking good for the Republicans. So let's go back in time. Well, the post-World War II era has not been kind to the president's political party in midterm elections. So going back to 1946, the president's political party has lost an average of 25 seats in the midterm elections, and only twice has the president's party actually gained seats, 1998 and 2002. So that was 2 midterm cycles in a row. But each one had extraordinary circumstances that meant the historical pattern was broken. Now, the Republicans only need to get 1/5, right? They only need to get 5 in the House. The average is 25 in order to take control of the House of Representatives and effectively derail Joe Biden's policy agenda. And to take control of the Senate, well, they just need 1. That's even easier. So not only, by the way, do the Republicans have the historical winds behind their backs going into next year, but the party controls the redistricting process in 20 states, whereas the Democrats control it only in 11. And some of the states that Republicans control the redistricting process, Florida, Texas, are big gainers in redistricting. So should the historical pattern hold, that's very bad news for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party's national policy agenda. It means that this president and the Democrats right now have a very short window of opportunity to affect policy changes. And the president is likely to spend the second half of his term in office fending off GOP legislative initiatives. He still has that great veto power, but it's likely we're going to have significant political stalemate in the second half of Joe Biden's first term, which means that both parties are going to just simply be putting up issues to posture for the 2024 elections. And all of this, most discouraging, I believe, for this audience, is a potential huge boost to the electoral prospects of former President Donald Trump, who already is hinting at a rematch in 2024. It would also mean that if the Republicans make significant gains, if they merely uphold the historical patterns, that Trump's loss in 2020 did no damage to the Republican Party throughout this country. And actually, I've written a long paper published in a journal about how 2020 really was a great year for the Republican Party. If you take away the 2 Senate seats in Georgia, which never should have flipped, but Trump made that possible, and Trump's loss in the Electoral College, looking down tickets, state legislative races, local races, holding governorships, holding state legislature majorities, the Republicans were picking up all over the country in 2020. So midterm elections almost always go badly for the president's party. But to make it more discouraging, in some recent election cycles, it's even been worse than the historical pattern. Think 1994, Democrats lost 54 seats and the House for the first time in 40 years, and 8 Senate seats. 2010, the Republicans gained an astounding 63 House seats and 6 Senate seats. And Donald Trump in 2018, that was a mixed result. The Republicans lost 40 House seats, very significant, but they picked up 2 in the Senate. Now, the 2 that were the exceptions, 1998, the Republicans placed a bet that their impeachment inquiry would gain them a lot of seats, more than the historical pattern. They lost that bet hugely. The Democrats picked up seats, and Newt Gingrich resigned. He took responsibility and resigned from his speakership. And then 2002, of course, was the first 9/11 election, when George W. Bush had historically large popularity in the country. So without some exceptional circumstances in 2024, it appears the Democrats are slated to lose their congressional majorities. Now, it is worth nonetheless considering factors that could tilt the outcomes in 2024 more to the Democrats than the historical pattern suggests. Presidential popularity, number 1. Since 1946, again, presidents with below 50% approval ratings lose an average of 37 seats in the House, but those with above 50%, they lose merely an average of 14 seats in the House midterms. Biden is above 50% approval, something his predecessor never got during his 4 years in office. Second, a strong economy bolsters the president's party in midterm elections as well. Should the economy continue to roar in 2022 with COVID infections declining at that point and the nation entering a period of high optimism, I think the prospects for the president improve even further. And then finally, former President Trump remains extremely unpopular among the swing voters, who are the ones who tip the scales in the midterm elections. Should the former president refuse to exit the political stage and talk of running for a second term, that keeps the issue of Donald Trump alive for the Democrats. So here we are. The Democrats are pinning their hopes on popular president, strong economy, turning the corner on COVID, and then Trump's unpopularity. Those 4 factors could mitigate against the historical pattern that favors the Republicans. Also, what about the possibility of some wild card event or issue that fundamentally changes the dynamics of the midterms? An international crisis that could generate a rally around the flag effect that always benefits the the president, much like 9/11 bolstered President Bush's party in 2002. Or take a policy issue that can transform the electoral landscape. That issue potentially is abortion rights. As you know, the US Supreme Court agreed to take up the Mississippi law that bans almost all abortions after 15 weeks. Now, the court is likely to issue a ruling in the summer of 2022, right in the midst of the midterm election campaigns. Should the court uphold the Mississippi law, and keep in mind, 6-3 conservative majority with 3 Trump appointees, so they own this one politically if this happens. A political backlash is highly likely at that point, as very strong majorities in this country support the Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion. And there is as many of you I am sure know, I followed that campaign closely. I followed the candidates. I went to all the debates in person. I've written about it in books on Virginia and Southern politics. In 1989, the Webster decision by the United States Supreme Court that gave the states the right to enact additional abortion restrictions that put Roe v. Wade under a cloud of threat of elimination, fundamentally transformed the gubernatorial campaign in Virginia, and abortion became the lead issue. There was a Washington Post Schar School poll in 2019 on the abortion issue. So many of you may know we in the Schar School have a co-branded public opinion poll with the Washington Post. We do about 3 to 4 polls per year. We'll be doing polls in the governor's race this year, of course. Our poll 2 years ago showed, and I don't think public opinion has changed fundamentally, very strong majorities in Virginia in favor of upholding Roe versus Wade and upholding fundamental abortion rights. So imagine if this issue gets dumped into the midst of the midterm campaigns in 2022. Doug Wilder rode to the governorship in what was then the closest election in the Commonwealth's history, as a statewide election, that is, winning by merely 4,700 or so votes. But there was a big political backlash that year against the Republican candidate, Marshall Coleman, who took a position on the abortion issue, not very different from Glenn Youngkin this year. I now write a twice per month column for the Washington Post on Virginia politics. So please look for that every other Monday. Next Monday will be my next one. There will be a new column. And my next column is going to be gubernatorial campaigns, no place for amateurs, how campaigns get upended by unforced and amateur mistakes. Glenn Youngkin has made perhaps a critical one in this campaign with his comments on the abortion issue to a couple of folks who he thought were sympathetic to the position he has taken on the issue, not knowing that they were Democratic Party activists who were recording him and put it out there in the public. And boy, was that a gift to Terry McAuliffe. That was the issue that drove, according to the exit polls, the election away from Marshall Coleman, an election he should have won, to Doug Wilder in 1989. And remember that year, it was a big issue even in New York City, where some guy named Rudy Giuliani lost to David Dinkins, right? So we had New York City's first African-American mayor and the nation's first elected Black governor in 1989, both campaigns riding strongly on the issue of abortion rights in lieu of a controversial Supreme Court decision that upended the political dynamics that election year. And again, that could happen next year. And Virginia this year will be a preview in some respects of how powerful that issue could be in the national elections next year. So I've given you the conditions under which the Democrats possibly could upend the historical patterns and do far better than the historical pattern suggests they will do in a midterm election. Now, as for the Republicans, well, they have the historical winds behind their backs, but they cannot passively expect that that's enough to take back control of Congress. They need to combat the above factors, perhaps, that bolster the Democrats, but it's hard to run against a popular president. It's hard to run against a strong economy. Glenn Youngkin is trying that right now. It's not working. He keeps saying the Virginia economy is in the ditch. All the data say otherwise. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know whose votes he's winning on that one, because I don't think anyone believes it. Attacking the president, attacking a popular president, well, that plays well to the GOP base, but it does little or nothing to persuade swing voters. Some say the economy is not faring well, as Youngkin has said, but again, the data say otherwise. Some are attacking COVID policies. Some are applauding that people didn't get vaccines. Did you see that? Unbelievable. I don't believe some of what I'm seeing in America these days. It's just absolutely incredible. But again, that's getting no traction outside of the very conservative GOP base right now. And then the fourth of the four factors I said that are going for the Democrats, how did the Republicans undo them? Disown Donald Trump? Really? Well, you're going to get primaried if you do that. So you either express fidelity to Mr. Trump if you're an elected Republican, or you risk getting primaried. So there's not much for the Republicans to do in these four areas I identified as the Democrats' advantages going into the midterms. So what can the Republicans do? Well, what they are doing is resorting to hot button cultural and social issues to try to drive suburban swing voters away from the Democrats. The culture wars attacks on critical race theory appear to be gaining some traction for Republicans. There's evidence out there that suburban voters are really getting weary of far left messaging on systemic racism and your white privilege. I don't think it's a good electoral message, quite frankly, for the Democrats. Republicans likely benefit as well from the data on rising crime rates in some parts of the country. So New York Times looked at, rising serious crime rates in 37 metropolitan areas, and the numbers are deeply concerning. Defund the police has been a horrible message for Democrats, and it's allowed Republicans to seize the crime issue as their own. And now Democrats are trying to play catch up, putting forward proposals on crime because they don't want the Republicans to own the issue. But it's the rhetoric, right? It's the slogans that stick in the minds of voters more than the substance of all the policy proposals. And this is a problem for Democrats. New York City Democratic Party primary for mayor, in the exit poll, 50% said their number one issue was rising crime. In perhaps the most hyper-liberal jurisdiction in the United States, in the Democratic Party's primary, the number one issue was rising crime. This is a huge warning shot at the Democrats right now. Republican law and order campaigns in the past have worked. Go back to the 1980s and 90s, where the Republicans got a lot of traction nationally. In Virginia, remember, George Allen and others, rode these law and order campaigns. Jim Gilmore campaigned for governor like he was campaigning for sheriff. So Republicans know putting fear in the minds of suburban voters that the crime rate's going up and they're coming after you is a powerful political issue. Additionally, the Republicans believe that immigration issues will play to their favor with swing voters. With renewed border crisis and the Biden administration in a nearly impossible situation trying to resolve it, the Republicans will continue to ramp up their attacks on the Democrats for being soft on illegal immigration and also therefore fueling rising crime rates throughout the country. Other factor for the Republicans, I'll finish up in just a minute and leave sufficient time for questions and answers. Republicans hold strong majorities nationally of governorships and state legislative bodies. That means the party has a big advantage in redistricting, as well as in its efforts to restrict voting rights. As the Supreme Court effectively gutted Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, the Department of Justice now has little or no authority to block a number of voting restriction actions by southern state legislatures in particular, without initiating litigation that will go on for years. Under Section 4, by the way, I think, as you know, it states that with problematic histories of racial discrimination, certain states have to submit their redistricting plans for federal approval. That no longer is the case. And just take, for example, Texas, right? Texas is getting 2 seats with redistricting. The Republican legislature and the governor are going to create 2 districts favorable to the Republicans. That is a certainty. Under the former system, before the Supreme Court decision, they would have had to present a redistricting plan to the Department of Justice that ultimately would have provided one district to a majority minority population district, likely a Hispanic one, thus splitting the two districts, Democrat and Republican. So to finish up my former remarks, the 2022 midterm elections appear right now to favor the Republicans taking control of Congress, which would mean Biden's agenda effectively is finished. And then he becomes perhaps a veto president, trying to stop the Republicans from taking control of the agenda. Some presidents are successful in saying no, right? Gerald Ford was a veto president. Strong Democratic majorities put forth one progressive policy proposal after another, and he was successful in stopping the Democratic Party from taking control of the policy agenda. Bill Clinton not only used his veto power after 1994 disaster, but he repositioned himself more in a moderate conservative stance on a number of issues in order to work with the Republican majority in order to get things done. But there's also an interesting lesson there, right? How the Republicans, when they staged what they thought was their great comeback in 1994, ultimately set themselves up for failure in 1996. Remember the incredible shrinking president, the Time magazine cover with Bill Clinton like this, tiny little figure on Newt Gingrich's shoulder. And analyses at that time saying that we were going to go back to a 19th century model of governance in which Congress is the leader of the policy agenda and presidents are reactive. None of that happened, because the more the Republicans tried to do what they said they would do in the 94 campaign, the more unpopular they became and the more they set themselves up for failure, thinking they had a mandate, right? When the vote largely was a retrospective analysis of Bill Clinton's performance his first 2 years in office and the unpopularity of the healthcare proposal, okay? And this is an important lesson, one I wrote about that some people didn't like, but others agreed with in one of my Washington Post columns about how political parties have to be very careful not to misread their mandates. And this happens all the time, right? Because the candidates go out there, they campaign on the issues, they hear lots of applause, they win the election, and they think it's because they like me, and it's because they agree with me and the positions I took on the issues, right? Well, maybe they just thought you were the lesser of two evils, or maybe they just really don't like the other guy. They're okay with you, but they don't want your policy agenda either. When elected officials try to do what they said they were going to do without a deeper analysis of the meaning of the election, they get themselves in trouble, okay? There was a great little book written by congressional scholar Richard Fenno about the 1994 election and its consequences, called Learning to Govern. And it was very interesting because he pointed out that in the 94 election cycle, remember, the easy media interpretation was that Gingrich and the Republicans were brilliant because they nationalized the congressional midterm elections by putting forward a contract with America, a 10-point plan, and made the election a referendum on those 10 policy positions. The polling data showed a majority of Americans didn't know about a contract with America, okay? Among those who did know it, very few could identify any policy items that were in the 10-point pledge. Among those who had the most knowledge, they knew of a contract with America, they knew what was in it, they were the most likely to be against it. So Fenno's point was the Republicans misread their mandate. It was anti-Clinton, it was anti-healthcare proposal, anti-Hillary, all of that. But the Republicans went forth believing they love us, And I wrote a slightly controversial piece in my Washington Post column about whether the Democrats in Virginia, by lurching more to the far progressive side of the spectrum in the state legislature, are setting themselves up for a political backlash in Virginia, okay? and it's a speculative piece. I don't know, if that indeed will be the case, but my point is parties always need to be careful how they read the electoral results. If the Republicans merely achieve the historical pattern of gaining enough seats to take a majority in 2022, they have to be very careful how they read the meaning of that, because victory could be the first step toward ultimate failure in 2024 for them. It's interesting. So one of my future columns may be how the Democrats win by losing in 2022. Because these Republicans won't be able to help themselves. They're just going to go full bore on some of the crazy stuff, as well as the traditional tax and regulatory issues that Republicans have always liked. And if they do that, losing the midterms may end up being the best thing that ever happened to the Democrats. Ultimately. So it's just interesting. It's like playing three-dimensional chess in politics. You always got to think, a couple steps ahead and on different levels to figure out what's going on. So I'll stop there, and happy to take your questions on the midterms, the Virginia campaign this year, and just about anything else.
Yeah, I'll take the prerogative of the first question.
Sure.
One thing you didn't mention was organized labor. The Democrats have certainly been very aggressive on a number of fronts. They've sponsored what they call the PRO Act, PRO Act, which would repeal the right to work provision in the Taft-Hartley law, among other things, make organizing unions much easier. In Virginia, a year ago, the newly Democratic legislature passed provisions to allow for collective bargaining between local governments and local government labor unions. And I was wondering whether you thought that had an effect on the political spectrum on either the Virginia gubernatorial election. I note that the percentage of the labor force that is members of unions has been declining since World War II. And I wonder how successful this will be as a strategy.
It's risky for the Democrats. The phrase right to work has a connotation to it that goes beyond, the actual meaning of current practice in the Commonwealth. You're against the right to work. So politically, it's always been a thorny issue. For the Democrats. I think it will be a good test issue as to whether Virginia really is a blue state now. I've written extensively about Southern politics. Let me see if I can find it here. So this is one of my latest books. I don't know how well it shows there. I'm one of 4 authors, so I can't take any more than 1/4 credit for it. But the book examines how the South has transformed since the late 1960s, and how that transformation has fundamentally changed United States national politics, right? So looking at the South as sort of a driver in the transition of American politics, with Virginia as the lead, right? So we're seeing a move toward more progressive, social and economic policies in some regions of the South, and the ability to talk about such issues, such as labor issues, in different ways, whereas repealing right to work in the past would have just killed the Democratic candidate in Virginia statewide. I'm not sure it will anymore. But we authors issue a kind of caution to those who merely look at the current political and also the long-term demographic changes taking place in what we call the growth states of the American South, not the stagnant states. We have a statistical definition of what's a stagnant state and what's a growth state. The shorthand, Virginia's growth, Mississippi is stagnant, but it's the growth states, right, that are transitioning, becoming two-party competitive, or like Virginia, leading Democrat. and where it's possible to be talking about issues such as labor issues with a progressive message and still be politically viable, whereas 10, 20 years ago, impossible. So we see potentially profound change coming to American politics should these trends continue. Again, I think Virginia this year is going to be a really important test case, because in addition to right to work, right, you have, a lot of the sort of social and cultural issues that the Democrats in the legislature, I mean, they're not hiding it. I've written for years about the politics of the religious right, and until Trump, their calling card was their ability to try to stay under the radar, and affect incremental policy change, death by 1,000 cuts, Democrats called it, all throughout the country. And then they got emboldened, of course. The Democrats are not trying to do anything under the radar. They perceive that the electorate is all with them. And again, that raises the mandate question, whether they've overreached or not. So I think it's a we'll see.
Okay.
Not a definitive answer from me on that one.
No, but I appreciate your answer. Does someone else have a question? Stuart, do you want to ask a question, Stuart?
Right. So Republicans get a pretty substantial part of the Latin vote. What things might Democrats do to increase their share of the Latin vote?
Right. So there are a couple of very interesting statistics about the 2020 elections, right? Mm-hmm. Democrats are a coalition of minorities, as we all know. Republicans win the white vote. That's a given. It's all about turnout, right? Barack Obama was phenomenally successful at ramping up turnout among groups that traditionally have had lower turnout rates than white voters. Hillary Clinton, not so good. After 4 years of Trump, it got really ramped up, right? In 2020, as the Trump base got ramped up too, but the Democrats just ramped it up even bigger. But as a percentage of voting, interestingly, Trump did about, depending on which exit poll you use, the one I've used says 6%, some say up to 10% better among Hispanic Latino voters than he did in 2016, okay? Traditional interpretation suggests that a lot of the anti-socialism, right, message against the Democratic Party played with certain segments of the Hispanic community. In some communities in southern Texas, for example, where I have to tell you, many Hispanics don't even consider themselves Hispanic. They say we're white. They're multi-generational Hispanics who've been living, who don't have a deep Hispanic identity, voted more for Trump than Biden in some places. So the Asian American vote increased 11 percentage points for Trump over what it had been in 2016. This should be shocking to Democrats, okay? And I think Democrats, more than anything else, cannot assume that minority voters are a lock for the Democratic Party. With regard to Latino voters you're asking about, it's not just immigration. That's not their only issue, okay? There are bread and butter issues. Hispanic Americans tend to be socially much more conservative, much more religious, okay? Much more against LGBTQ rights, much more against gay marriage, attend religious services more frequently, have a stronger commitment to the so-called traditional family. There are issues on which Republicans can peel away Latino voters from the Democrats, right? And so the Democrats have to have a broader, more encompassing message for different minority population voters and not assume that these are lock voters for the Democratic Party. And by the way, when I say Trump did better in 2020 among those voters than he did in 2016, remember, for example, in 2016, there was supposed to be the Latino surge against President Trump that was going to sink his candidacy for the presidency. Well, you know what happened? Latino turnout was lower than it was in 2012, and he did better with Latinos than Mitt Romney did by several percentage points. Okay, so totally counterintuitive, I think, to this audience, to me, to given the man's rhetoric about Mexican immigrants and South American and Central American immigrants, and his sometimes overt racism and the like, that he would actually be able to do better than a very traditional conservative, mainstream like Mitt Romney, with certain minority voters, but he did. And Democrats have to take notice.
Other questions? Herschel?
You're talking about these elections as if they're the way they were, I don't know, 4 or 8 years ago. Republicans in Georgia and Texas, and I presume they'll do it in Arizona, have passed laws which appear to say, if we lose the election, we can fire the election officials and recount the votes. And it just appears that I wonder your comments on whether the Republican Party has changed from one that seeks a majority to one that will get and hold power by any means.
Well, yeah, exactly right. And I'm sorry to say that it's the latter for many Republicans right now. It's all about winning by whatever means, right? Otherwise, why would they be favoring restrictive voting laws, okay, that are intended to reduce the likelihood of voting turnout among some communities that tend to vote more Democrat than Republican, right? Why would they be enacting these kinds of measures that attack the very foundations of democratic elections themselves? This is the stuff that has me scared, I have to tell you, for the future of our democratic republic. If we can't agree on the fundamental norms and principles of our electoral process, of our constitutional system, we're in big trouble. And we've seen,
Amen.
yeah, I mean, we've seen a rise in, extremist politics, attacks on institutions. I mean, January 6th, what a shocking event to have had happened in this country that played around the world. For 30 years, I've been doing occasional lectures, 1 or 2 a month for international visiting groups who are sponsored by the United States State Department, who come here to learn about American democratic politics and procedures, small d. And I lecture to them about the federal system and its operations. And, the whole idea, of course, is to warm up people from emerging democracies and struggling democracies about, how things are done here and how good it can be for you. And it's hard to give those lectures now. It really is. I mean, is America an example by our behavior at this point to the rest of the world? Trump and the rising fascist tendencies of some significant portion of the American population have called into question, whether we have a long sustainable democratic republic with generally accepted, norms and, rules of the game that we all play by. So I'm very discouraged, very worried about it. I think the only way we get Trump out of the picture is for the Republicans to take a beating in the midterms next year. The Republicans cannot get out from the hold of Donald Trump over them and their party without the party just getting shellacked in the midterms. Historical patterns say it's not going to happen. A lot of people, I'm sure you all were, hoping it happened in 2020, right? And yet the Republicans down ticket had a really good year in 2020. Here's a mistake, by the way, that I think Democrats make more than Republicans nationally. And I think it's a big issue for the party, okay? Politics is about grassroots. It's about local, not just federal, right? It's about local and state, not just federal. During the Obama years, someone has to write this book. The Democratic Party was decimated throughout this country in local and state legislative and gubernatorial elections. The number of lost Democratic Party seats in state legislatures throughout this country and in county boards, city councils, school board, I mean, shocking, in the thousands, okay? You know what? Like or dislike President Obama, he didn't pay attention to building the party at the grassroots. You know, his 2012 campaign was all about the presidential. I think he had enough political capital and security to have put more of his resources into helping to build the party at the grassroots. He and the National Democratic Party didn't do it. Huge mistake. The Republicans, when they're in the wilderness, they're building at the grassroots, they're building a team, and they're paying attention to local and state politics. I don't know, they're relentless about it, actually. And it's just really surprised me the difference between the two political parties in that regard in party building. I'm not saying the Democrats do nothing. I'm saying that they've always been a step behind the Republicans when it's come to the sort of grassroots and local and state level politics. And so why do the Republicans control, 37 governorships and 56 out of 89 elected state legislative bodies and have several thousand more elected state legislators than the Democrats do? More people in this country support the policies of the Democratic than the Republican Party right now. Something's wrong.
I was wondering whether you could comment just briefly on what would happen if Donald Trump and a large portion of his family were indicted and possibly subject to a very high publicity trial between now and the midterm election day.
Yeah, I think that would be a gift to the Republican Party in the country if it were to happen. I maintain a nonpartisan stance, but I just, on that one, I can't hold back. I want to have two vigorous, competing, viable political parties in this country. The Republicans have turned into something shockingly different than the Republican Party I grew up understanding, in the Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Bush years, right? It's a very different political party right now, but it's entirely because of the hold that Donald Trump has over the party, the constant threat that he'll take out people of his own political party in primaries, that has made the party so beholden to him, and the ambition of certain political figures in the Republican Party who believe that by following Trump, that's their ticket, right? Potentially to national office. So Ron DeSantis, Ted Cruz, the list, goes on and on, political figures all vying for, who else, for that position to be the next, Trump leader. The other guy from Florida, I'm forgetting. And we'll see what happens there.
Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio, thank you. Yes.
Mark Teal, do you have a question? No. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, yes, Joan, please.
Hi. Yes, I'm interested in your opinion about what the next election for state legislators in Virginia looks like.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Virginia sometimes in these off year elections is a harbinger of the midterms, right? So traditionally in Virginia, as you know, I didn't talk about this so much, the party in the White House tends to lose seats in Virginia legislative races the following year, and the party's gubernatorial candidate tends to lose as well, right? You know, ironically, the one guy who upended that pattern, Terry McAuliffe, is the candidate again, trying to do it twice. And keep in mind, by the way, how close that election was against Ken Cuccinelli, really. And it wasn't supposed to be close at all. So my piece in the Washington Post several weeks ago argued that the Democrats may have provided an opening for the Republicans in the legislative elections this year by having lurched very far to the left on a number of issues where, again, they read their mandate as something perhaps more than the voters intended. You know, keep in mind, the Democrats moved from a 2-to-1 disadvantage, right, in the House of Delegates to majority status in just a couple election cycles, which is historically unprecedented. It was all anti-Trump, okay? I mean, voters who had regret about 2016, all those young folks who said, yeah, Hillary's going to win. I wanted Bernie. I'm going to sit on my hands. You know, all the regret there was about the outcome of 2016, people got fired up. And who had an election in 17? Virginia. 19, Virginia again. So, you know, Virginians had a chance to showcase their discontent with the state of national politics under a Trump administration throughout Virginia local elections. And by the way, I would say there were some pretty good, very responsible, you know, relatively senior status, you know, strong on policy Republican members who got taken out in those election cycles merely because they had an R next to their name. You know, there are some Democrats who could have been a dead cat. They would have won with a D next to their name in those election cycles. You know, so I think Democrats have to be very, very careful in thinking we're on a roll here. Look at the patterns of past couple election cycles. Everything's going our way, and Virginia's now blue. You know, I think their majorities right now are a little bit tentative, frankly. So.
Do you want to take just a minute to sum up and tell us where we can find your books and your column and your website and so on?
Oh, okay. Yeah. You know, for the column, it's the Washington Post local opinions section. Okay. So if you just go to Washington Post local opinions, alternating Mondays. So next Monday would be the next one. Okay. My latest one, a week ago Monday, was on how the Republicans, in trying to enact voting restrictions, may actually be harming their own political prospects. You know, I show evidence of how Republicans did extremely well in state and local elections in 2020. Suggesting that there's no evidence that restricting the voting, you know, is going to make the Republicans even stronger, right? It's a bit of a counter-conventional wisdom argument, which I like to do sometime. So the next column will be next Monday. It's going to be about amateur politicians making unforced errors. Glenn Youngkin on abortion. So that'll be my next one. Yeah, I don't mind telling you what the article is about. So look for that. I have a website. It lists all my publications, my books. You know, Amazon.com has them. So my book on the politics of the American South, it is in paperback, Oxford University Press, which means it's not ridiculously overpriced like most academic books. I have a short book on federalism with Oxford University Press. It's like $7-10, I can't remember. And then I have a new book that's going to come out next year, interestingly, with the same 3 co-authors with the same publisher, Oxford, on African-American statewide candidates in the American South. Yeah.
Fascinating subject. Yeah,
I wrote the chapter on Virginia. My colleague, who's the expert on Georgia politics, wrote about the Georgia elections. It's a fascinating read. We try to do a little bit of a statistical analysis to understand what makes African-American candidates for statewide election competitive in the South and the Deep South, and why some are successful statewide and others have not succeeded. So, what makes a Georgia success but not a South Carolina success, for example, in year 2020. So keep a lookout for that. It probably won't be out for at least another several months.
Okay, thank you. And we can't tell you how appreciative we are of you giving us your time today. And we wish you every success in your analysis and your polling and in your educating young political scientists at the Schar School. We are now joined by Takis Karantonis, who is not only a member of the Arlington County Board, but he happens to be the Democratic nominee for the Arlington County Board. And so we'll turn the floor over to Takis. I'm sorry, Takis, we can't hear you. You're not muted, but you have to like check your microphone. Takis, check your microphone here. I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll be patient. You have to like select computer microphone or something. Well, yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay.
I apologize.
So for some reason, the software defaulted on a microphone that is not existing. So it's a ghost microphone on my computer. It said something like line in microphone or so. I'm so sorry that I missed. I'm late to this meeting today because we have a full day today, and I missed Mark Rozell's speech and remarks.
We have it recorded, and we'll send you the link. We'll send you the link.
I would be very thankful for that. I have a very high esteem for what he has been doing, and I have to tell you, for me as a newbie, a first-time elected official, he has been also in collaboration with some regional elected officials, prior and current ones, like from Arlington, like Mary Hines, Chief Set, etc. He was instrumental in organizing a recurring set of seminars for regional elected officials in the metropolitan region to get them acquainted with issues that are emerging, like, for example, confronting the climate challenge, like confronting the housing challenge, like confronting other governance challenges. And I believe that to me, they have been really extremely helpful for exchanging ideas and for getting some much needed mentorship in issues from more experienced colleagues. So I really appreciate what the Schar School is doing under his leadership, and I really think it's a great asset for our region. So so for today, as you know, I have the honor to be the Democratic nominee for Arlington County Board this cycle, this year. I am here to try to answer questions that are in your minds. I will just briefly say, first of all, thank you to many of you who have been extremely helpful in all possible dimensions during the primary. And along the first year, we are almost exactly, I'm almost exactly 1 year in office since the special election this last year in July. And, I found many of you very valuable partners and interlocutors, and I have benefited a lot from your insights. The second thing I want to say is the way ahead is always, as we are in Arlington, is always a competitive way. We have a challenger, Mark Cantwell from Yorktown, who I consider, he's running as an independent. I consider him a conservative independent. Audrey Clement is also running, who you probably know from previous electoral races in Arlington, several ones, and we have also a younger a libertarian challenger. So we will have a slate of options, and I anticipate in this race to touch upon many things that are of importance for local governments in Arlington. First and foremost, I do believe that we will talk a lot about housing. Last year, we've seen, over the previous years, we've seen a lot of thinking about what the future of housing is in Arlington. It is one of our most pressing big challenges. We are in a supply-starved place. Housing cost is absolutely unaffordable. It's very difficult to attract a young or a newer workforce here in Arlington. It's very difficult for seniors to find affordable places to stay, especially when they are on a fixed income. It is very difficult for newcomers, for moderate and lower income residents to stay in Arlington. We're in a constant race against market forces and against the very fact that our zoning in Arlington doesn't really allow for a lot of housing supply expansion. Now, as always in Arlington, we want to respond to all these challenges, but we want to do that in a measured and wise and well-planned way, with as much buy-in from all neighborhoods and all stakeholders as possible. So I am really very focused on this. I've been a housing advocate for my entire political life. I do not think that along with food and employment and health, housing is literally a pillar of quality of life and of a safe predictor of the long-term viability and resilience for our community, economic and social. And I forgot to say also education is the fifth element here. We will talk about education, even if it's a county board race, but I do believe that anything we do has implications for our schools. It's still the place where we put almost half of our tax base is funding the school system. So we will have to answer questions about how well we plan for schools in the future. I am very focused on this. I was focused while being in office and going forward. We have to keep the economic vibrancy and vitality of Arlington alive so that we can afford the class of public school system that we have today, and that we can adapt to the enrollment pressures that we've seen in the past, and we continue to see today, even if attenuated somehow by normal demographic fluctuations. Another big issue that I don't see very often picked up in common conversations, but I feel that this really permeates right now the national and regional discussion, and I do believe that Arlington can play a very strong role, is the local response to what is commonly referred to as climate change, like I call it the climate emergency. We are not exempt from the effects. Virginia is not exempt from the effects of that. They're happening today, and you don't need to turn on the news from California and the West Coast and the heat waves that we have and the fires and the hurricanes and all this. We have real climate impacts that affect our own homes, our metropolitan region here and globally. The thinking about how best to respond as a nation is already structuring and framing the way the federal government is reacting to this, and accordingly, we are also called to take measures as well. Critical issues that Arlington can lead is, for example, accelerating the electrification of our transportation systems, also of our housing. That means, heating and cooling. If we can power these functions with electricity, with electric power, we can later find a way to invest in sustainable power sources and renewables. Most industrialized nations are doing it this way, and localities like Arlington, small towns, like small progressive towns like Arlington, are usually leading the response, because we can actually afford to do that here. We're in a good position to, to decide to electrify our buildings, to decide to build better, to build for net zero, to build at with a very low carbon footprint, and so be leaders in Virginia and beyond. I really care a lot about a changing of mindset in Arlington, and being able to ask not only developers and investors and our economy to do more about this, but also our citizens to do more about this. And I'm happy to discuss more details as we go ahead. This includes a renewed focus on natural resources, on making our parks higher, investing in quality in our parks, if we can not lose the opportunity to invest also in quantity, so in expanding and finding ways to have more green and recreational spaces in Arlington. It is tough. It is really difficult. We are quite tapped out in terms of the land use, but there are still enormous opportunities. To improve what we have, to make it more sustainable and more affordable, to do a lot more to keep our tree canopy and enhance it, and the fifth thing is to invest in money to make sure that we are ready for opportunities that present themselves to expand the footprint of these parks, to add acres. We have committed to add 30 acres in 10 years. This is a very tall goal. It's really a tough goal to achieve. So I do believe that I will have to become more creative and more deliberate in pursuing this. This is the fundamental framework around my focus on making sure that Arlington works for everybody. The challenges of the pandemic really have revealed something that we knew it existed, but we didn't know. So inequalities, unequal access to resources, unequal access to housing, health, food, education. We knew in general that we had this inequalities in Arlington, but we didn't know that with such detail we know it today. Today we really learned from the pandemic very hard lessons about this. And I do believe that we have to translate these lessons into policy as we go forward. Some of my colleagues have been talking about shared prosperity, about creating pathways to prosperity by, pointedly, deliberately investing in our most marginalized and left behind communities, of which we still have a significant areas in Arlington. And I am really committed to doing this. This started with paying a lot of attention to making the pandemic response as equitable as possible. I remind you that at the very beginning, we weren't really prepared for that, and we had to basically create it from scratch. And today, this expands to a constant focus on making sure that we address inequalities when we do basically everything from from rental support, social services, but also housing, employment, health, everything that our government does. I was yesterday talking about sports facilities. That's also an equitable access issue. So all in all, making Arlington work for all, this is core democratic governance. It is also not trivial, and it's quite hard to do, and it takes always a village, and it takes your commitment as well to help us who are in elected office to accomplish that. We need you on the ground all the time, and bringing things up so that we can address them and that we can create our budgets around them, our policies around them, and create the implementation lines for policy so that it is also effective and it helps people and keeps people here. A huge commitment of mine is to really stem against this multi-year trend of displacement of those who couldn't afford it or were really pushed out of Arlington because the economic conditions don't allow them to stay here. So, and with that, I'm open to questions and discussion.
As moderator, I'll kick it off, and then I'll call on the other people. Probably the most shocking event to occur after the primary was the collapse of the high-rise concrete condominium building just north of Miami, Florida. And that building was, 40 years old. There are many high-rise concrete buildings in Arlington that are 50 and 60 years old. And, I think it also that not only shows up engineering failures, but shows up the inherent governance challenges of a condominium board, which is a very difficult, harder to serve on than a county board even. So I was wondering, what are you in Arlington County going to do in light of the lessons learned from Miami, Florida, Takis?
Oh, thank you for the question. So you should know that I have governance experience in that. I've been almost 10 years on the condo board of quite a big condo, by the way, Arlington Village. And while Arlington Village is a townhome condo, actually garden apartment condo, we had to face failure of concrete. In the 1940s, we are not exposed to the sea breeze and salty and moist air, but in the 40s they used to cure concrete with salt. So the attack on the rebound, yeah. I'm so intimately exposed to that. So at some point, about 6 years ago, an engineer came to the board. You may remember in 2011 we had a small earthquake in Virginia.
Right.
So that created a couple of, we inspected foundations after that, so just to make sure. And what did we find? We find some cracks. And what was the result of that? The result of that was a $10 million repair. And so that was the result of that. And I remember very well that the condo board was exposed with the findings, but we had a condo board. But we could do that very easily, and I will tell you why. First, our condo had reserves for repair and replacement, as we should, with every 5 years, doing a whole property assessment. And secondly, we were credit worthy, which means we cared a lot about our financials, and we were really focused on that. I understand that not everybody does that there are a lot of condo, it's not the problem. Buildings, like everybody's individual buildings, single family homes, bigger buildings and high rises will always have repair issues. It's unavoidable. But the key question is whether their boards are in a condition to early detect and early act and be, financially supported to do that. So for Arlington, this means that I do think that recasting of our Arlington condominium initiative that tries to empower and re-educate and improve condo board response to the day-to-day challenges it's urgent and needs to happen. I fully subscribe to that, and I know very well what it brings and what the benefits of that are. The moment that these volunteer board members understand what their duties are and they focus on their duty of care, they will do the right thing. We just need to make sure that they know that, so that we educate them accordingly. We have a housing outreach department, and I already talked with my colleagues to up our game there and reach out and see what our needs are. Some condo associations, especially some that are not doing very well financially, are already asking Arlington County to be, they are asking for money in the first place, which is very difficult because this is taxpayers' money and these are private owners. But I do believe that there are ways around that, and there are ways to, support them financially that are not necessarily with taxpayers' money, and just enable them to find a way to do their job, to secure their buildings, make, not to let maintenance, not to defer maintenance, which is the biggest mistake they can do, and so have solvent and good associations as we go forward. I'm really, and if you know anybody who needs help, just refer them to me. I will take that on.
Okay, well, thank you, Takis. Michael Raisin, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Takis, you mentioned the environmental crisis. And well, one factor in this is I know Biden wants to increase electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the county should follow his lead, or follow the lead of the federal government in investing in electric vehicles. Now, we have a big bus fleet here, a local bus fleet, and as soon as we get that bus fleet all electric, I think the better off we'll be. And my colleagues in the group that I'm a member of at the Temple are pressing Fairfax County to do the same thing. So I think there's either a funding issue or it's going to become before the Arlington County Board, where we want to convert some of our buses, or most of our buses, to electric status. So could you update us on the status of that request? Or?
So this is the update. So I do believe that most of my colleagues, if not all of them, I believe all of them, we want to see the electrification of our bus fleet and also of our school bus fleet the earlier the better. I do understand that the federal government is moving very fast on this and very decisively. I do understand also that the industry is improving by the day. So there are better models, there are more adequate types of buses available. Now, changing a fleet is not a trivial decision, and there are many things that play a role there. What kind of routes we have, whether we have to modify them, what kind of maintenance intervals we have, the kind of the operational part. The will is there. The guidance will be already in this CIP, the Capital Investment Plan, to proceed with that. We have good examples in the region. WMATA Metro has already started with electrifying buses. Has a plan to electrify buses. So Arlington will be very, very soon joining this club. I mind you that other than the individual, the personal vehicles, the Teslas and the electric vehicles, the bus and so bigger vehicles are still not a very mature technology. So, for example, there are differences in in performance in the summer versus the winter because of the batteries. And there is a lack of infrastructure right now, which is maybe the biggest issue, the lack of infrastructure for charging larger vehicles. Therefore, our focus will be on both sides, on setting the tone and giving guidance and challenging staff to bring us viable options to transform the fleet. And at the same time, and if I may add, my priority, number one priority, is to invest and make sure that we can invest quickly in the electric charging infrastructure, either ourselves or in combination with others, or with the private industry that is, in the starting blocks to do that. I am very confident that this part of electrification will accelerate very fast over the next 2-3 years. For this CIP, for this short-term CIP that we are discussing this weekend, on Saturday, we are still in conversation with staff to see whether we can postpone or prolong a bigger acquisition of almost 20 buses, maybe to gain a little more time so that staff and us have time to insert a bigger contingent of electrified buses into that. Mind you that still electric buses are more expensive, significantly more expensive than,
Yes.
than conventional ones. The federal government is telling us that they have programs to pay for the difference. However, they pay for the difference between when you change from diesel buses to electric buses. We don't have diesel buses anymore. We have compressed gas buses, and we could, bureaucratically not qualify for this gap financing, but we are working towards that. For me, it's a very big priority. In addition to everything else, I can tell you that a ride on an electric bus, if you have the opportunity to ride a DC circulator or so, is a far more comfortable ride. It's a nice ride. So I also hope that this will be part of our wooing in back our riders, and have this coming back after the pandemic of public transit with better technology and nicer vehicles.
Thank you, Takis. Anything you could do is appreciated.
Okay, Stuart, you're next.
You're muted.
Click on the green. Oh, there you go. Okay, you're unmuted.
Three-part question on carbon neutrality. Apparently, state building codes are weak, but in Arlington, buildings account for about 60% of emissions. There's the notion of flex codes or stretch codes. By passing a law in Richmond, it might allow localities to set more stringent codes. So the first part, is that a good idea? And do you think that such a bill could pass soon? Second part, is it realistic that we can meet our goals on carbon neutrality without more stringent building codes, just with incentives or something? Third part, what about small businesses? Can they afford to build under stricter codes, and how can we support both small business and carbon neutrality?
Great questions. I will start with question number 2 because it has a very short answer. My answer is no. I don't believe that just with incentives we're going to get to our carbon neutrality goals. I do firmly believe that updated, even more, better building codes are an absolute necessity. With incentives alone, this is not going to happen. It's just I'm old enough and I've seen some in the construction sector. I don't believe that without codes. And the first question was about how fast or slow Virginia is in adopting and updating its building codes, and my answer is Virginia is very slow in doing this. We are lagging more or less a decade behind from already existing and adopted codes in other places. And I do think that this needs to be addressed by the General Assembly. It's a firm part of our agenda. It is far, I mean, it helps us at the local level a lot if we can, if developers already know that they have to start at a way more, at a higher quality, engineering quality level. And we don't have to consider all this differential from a very old code. 2005 is the current right now. We have to cover that as an incentive. This is very difficult for us. So for us, getting the state, the Commonwealth, to adapt to current standards is important. And I don't remember the third question was about.
How can small businesses, can it work for them? Can they afford it? And how can that work out with tougher standards?
I do think that one of the most important pieces of why small businesses actually can afford, and when we say small businesses, we primarily we're talking in construction about businesses that build, single-family homes or small buildings, etc. So these businesses, at the levels of housing prices that we have, real estate prices that we have in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, if they cannot adapt their codes and the quality of the building to that, I don't know what would. So actually, I hear from small businesses the opposite. I hear them, please adopt the codes because we want to excel with an excellent product. We have the knowledge in place. This is for us a competitive advantage. We are smaller. We can more quickly adapt to that. We can deliver quality engineering in a faster way. So we may have an advantage there. I really think so. The international experience is that actually small businesses did the best. The big ones were that have established, economies of scale, and they are invested in a more less environmentally friendly and very capital efficient way to work. They have the bigger problem to adapt. So I think that a shift towards better buildings is a shift that helps small businesses rather than challenges them. It challenges them in a good way, and especially when still our market is buoyant in terms of prices.
Okay.
What I see now that breaks my heart every time is to see brand new $2 million homes that are so sloppily.
Any other questions for Takis? Okay, Takis, would you just take 1 or 2 minutes to summarize your remarks and tell us where we can find the website for your campaign and how we can get involved in your campaign?
Takis for Arlington, written in one word.com. On July 18th, that's a Sunday. This is this Sunday, next Sunday, at 3 p.m. We will be gathering. It's a fundraiser, but it will be an excellent opportunity to if you can attend it. It would be an excellent opportunity to see you and discuss in person and in detail. Please, if you can make it, it will be an honor for me to see you there. And the campaign will hold many more events, and I very much hope to see you you know, it on the campaign trail. So, and please do that. You know, come to, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to me for anything that, you know, comes to your attention, your neighborhood, discussions, etc. I am already walking with a civic association in neighborhoods all over Arlington, north, south, west, and east. I enjoy that a lot, as I enjoy my job at the county board. So don't hesitate to tell me, oh, please come too, or you know, we will host a meeting, we will host a meet and greet. I would be delighted to participate.
And Mark has added your URL to the chat. I want to thank you so much for taking the time with me. There.
And I see here in the chart that Maxwell mentioned that Democrats need to do better.
Okay,
at the
well, we seem to be
grassroots
having
level.
a technical.
Oh, I can still see you.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
I think we're having a meltdown on the internet here, but so on that basis, I want to thank you so profusely for taking the time to visit with us, and we wish you every success in your campaign, and we'll adjourn the meeting, and hopefully we won't have a internet slowdown next month. Thank you again, Takis, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Okay. Bye.